primary education for refugees. My name is Nina Papadopoulos, and I'm a senior education officer in the education section at UNHCR headquarters in Copenhagen. Today, we gather to address one of the most pressing issues in global education, ensuring quality primary education for refugee children. Despite numerous challenges, significant strides have been made, and we are here to discuss both the obstacles that persist and the opportunities that lie ahead. We want to highlight the value of coming together to champion refugee education and acknowledge the generous contributions from partners, including Education Above All, who have been instrumental in advancing refugee primary education globally and contributing to the generation of new evidence for our field. Integrating refugee students into national education systems to promote equitable access to quality education is a top priority for UNHCR. We call that refugee inclusion. Refugee inclusion in education is essential for fostering social cohesion, economic growth, and the personal development of displaced individuals. The status of refugee inclusion in national education systems reveals a mixed landscape. While some countries have made significant strides in integrating refugee children, many challenges persist. Next slide. Next slide. Our webinar will provide a peek into the study, and we're going to also put a link to the study in the chat, and explore successful case studies from Rwanda and Bangladesh, highlighting practical solutions and impactful strategies. This webinar aims to foster a deeper understanding of the progress made and to inspire continued efforts to overcome barriers in refugee education. We want to acknowledge Mohamud Hure and Girma Yadeta, who have been key to the success of this study. Next slide. We are honored to have a distinguished panel with us today. Ruth Naylor, the author of the study, will provide insights into global educational trends and their implications for refugee children. She is an experienced professional in the field of education, specializing in girls' education and education in conflict-affected countries. Mediatrice Uera will share the remarkable achievements and ongoing efforts in integrating refugee education within the national system. She is an Associate Education Officer for UNHCR in Kigali, Rwanda. Jahed Chowdhury from UNHCR Bangladesh will discuss the innovative approaches and challenges faced in the refugee camps of Cox's Bazar and Bashanchar. He has worked in various countries with a focus on education and emergencies. Since joining UNHCR in 2017, he has been deeply involved in education interventions for Rohingya children in Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh. Next slide. So to provide some context, here's the latest data on refugee enrollments. While global primary school enrollment rates for refugees have improved, disparities remain stark. In some regions, enrollment exceeds 90%, but in others, it falls below 50%. The transition from primary to secondary education remains a significant challenge, with secondary enrollment rates often less than half of that of primary. We also know that gender disparities persist for refugees. Refugee girls are less likely to attend school compared to boys. Efforts to create gender-specific learning spaces and community campaigns have shown positive results, but need scaling. The study explores how primary education for refugees can be improved in terms of access, quality, finance, and policy. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Ruth Naylor, who will talk through the research and findings from the study.
Thank you very much, Nina, for that introduction. And it was a real joy to be part of this study and see the work that's going on with refugees around the world and the progress that's being made. So it was very broad in scope, and we were looking for success and the enablers of success and asking people at different levels, from global to the classroom, what's been the successes and what has enabled that. We talk about these successes as breakthroughs. And as Nina said, it was very wide in scope. We were looking at access, quality, policy, and finance. So to tie that together in a framework, we built it around the inclusion continuum, from contexts where refugees have no access to formal education to fully inclusive systems where refugees are totally integrated into the national system and given the support they need. And so we were looking at policy breakthroughs where you have progress along that continuum, but also delivery breakthroughs. So step change in access, learning, and social cohesion. And we saw finance as a lever to bring about those breakthroughs in both policy, access, and quality. Okay, next slide, please. We did 2 in-depth case studies chosen at different points along the inclusion continuum. In Bangladesh, which where children, refugees don't have access to the national curriculum at all, and in Rwanda, where they're really progressing towards full inclusion, and refugees and students are learning together in schools managed by the government. And in these countries, we talk to students, we talk to parents, we talk to teachers, we talk to camp leadership and all the partners. And then we also took a global focus, starting with global respondents and regional and at the national level, and focused on 9 additional countries where we conducted interviews and looked at documents to identify a whole range of breakthroughs in policy and range of breakthroughs in delivery. So to the findings, and I want to start with what the refugees themselves told us. And from the successes they talked about, including individual successes of graduating from primary school, going on to secondary, there were 3 key enablers that came out from discussions. And the first was parents, really important at encouraging access and motivating children to study and learn, and not just their own children, but working with other families and encouraging them to send their children too. Pathways to secondary and higher education were really important as a motivating factor to drive and maintain enrollment and demand. And peaceful collaboration between refugees and host community members was really valued by students in Rwanda and also by the teachers in Bangladesh. And so that was clearly something they valued and helped promote quality as well as enrollment. So looking through, what were the enablers of success on those 4 areas? If we start by looking at access, the global data really reinforced what the refugees themselves told us, that community awareness campaigns conducted in close collaboration with parents really did work and were very important. And also having viable post-primary education pathways, including good secondary school, was really important. And refugees put a really high value on access to formal national curricula. So having that all the way through to the higher grades was really important for maintaining or increasing access. And as Nina highlighted, oh, sorry, can we just go back one slide? As Nina highlighted, there is still a gender gap. There are still barriers to girls, especially in upper primary and secondary. So making sure that girls complete primary, in some cases, that means female-only learning spaces. And we'll hear more about that from the Bangladesh case study. Next slide, please. When we think about quality, when a new curriculum is being introduced nationally, that's often a good opportunity to assign children to the right grade based on their learning levels, and also to upgrade teachers' skills. And in Pakistan, UNHCR took the introduction of a new curriculum as an opportunity to really progress inclusion and train refugee teachers in line with national teachers. And that teacher development needs to combine short courses with supervised classroom practice and peer learning. Hiring national and refugee teachers to work as teams together can be really effective. They bring together different skill sets. They're able to adapt to meet the different needs of the refugee and the national curriculum. And activities around building social cohesion are important, and as we've heard, are valued by the refugees themselves. And there's a really good example from Ecuador that you can read about more in the report. And also we'll be hearing a bit more about work on Rwanda around social cohesion. When we think about policy and progressing inclusion, what is clear is that transitioning from a setup where there is parallel education system for refugees, which is either for legal reasons or historical, that it's a protracted crisis, that education systems were set up before the focus on inclusion. Dismantling these is technically and politically very complex and very difficult. It requires close coordination, careful sequencing, and progress requires coordinating with government, humanitarian, development actors. And having an educational technical expert at the UNHCR country office can really help to accelerate that transition, to bring together the different players. If you look at the report, you'll see there's an example from Kurdistan region of Iraq where there's been amazing progress in integrating what was a separate system for refugees, although it was the same separate schools being integrated into the national system. And it's been a huge testament to the work of the education advisor there that has accelerated that process. And if we could go back, if using key moments of national education planning, such as an education sector assessment analysis, can be really useful. In DRC, the UNHCR education advisor made sure that the refugee hosting area was included in the education sector analysis. So refugee and hosting issues are included in national planning processes. So that highlights the importance of working with local authorities, not just working at the national level. And of course, close engagement with refugee communities is vital throughout any policy development work. In terms of finance, we've seen some real progress at the global level in terms of architecture of financing refugee education over the last decade or so. We've seen new mechanisms come into place for financing. And one of those is the World Bank funding through the IDA windows for refugees. And a lot of that is about building school infrastructure. Now, I previously was quite a skeptic of donor financed school infrastructure, but seen in this study, it really can be a lever for promoting inclusion of refugees in national education systems. Having said that, it only is a lever if it's done in close collaboration and close coordination with other actors in the refugee education sphere. And sometimes that coordination, while it might be good at the global level, it's not so strong at the national level. So again, a key role for national education advisors in UNHCR is enabling that coordination to happen at the national level. And we do see sometimes as you transition from humanitarian to international development funding, which is needed for inclusion, that transition is not always smooth. And as humanitarian funding is withdrawn, there needs to be international development funding to come in to replace it, to support national education systems for the ongoing costs of including refugees in their national systems. So I'm going to hand over now to Mediatrice, who can tell us a bit more about the situation in Rwanda.
Thank you so much, Ruth. I'm going to present on the case study of Rwanda. In Rwanda, we have around 135,000 refugees. Most of them are protracted. The majority, they are Congolese, and almost 50% they are children who go to school, into public schools across the country. Next slide, please. They are accessing education, they are integrated, and the primary enrollment rates for refugees is high. We have 94% of primary school age refugee children attending school. There's also quality. When on the area of quality, there is emphasis on professional development for teachers, training, on-the-job support, coaching and mentorship, and so on. There is also introduction of education technology in line with the national policy, because the Rwanda Education Board approves each content that goes to schools around the country. And now we have Pro Futuro Connected Learning Project, which is supporting around 15 schools in the hosting refugee schools, nearby camps. And both nationals and refugee children are attending because they are in the same schools, they are in the same classrooms, learning side by side. There is diverse offer of extracurricular activities, including both refugees and nationals. For example, Girls Club, peace initiatives, and sport is improving social cohesion within the school community. As Ruth mentioned in her previous presentation, there is really that cohesion for both nationals and refugee students. There's also improving of infrastructure. The previous slide, please. On the infrastructure, those schools hosting refugee students, there is overcrowding. And in order to respond that, there's been some improvement and construction of more classrooms just to resolve the issue. For financing, refugee hosting schools benefit from national development programs. Whenever the government of Rwanda is doing the planning in terms of education, they plan for both nationals and refugee students because they're attending the same classrooms and there is no exception. So far, we have 2 schools that are camp-based in a camp called Kiziba. They are not yet fully integrated when it comes to financing. The schools follow the national curriculum. Students sit for national exams as others, and they are, when it comes to the management of schools, the government is not paying teachers where we have 100% of teachers. They are refugees getting incentives instead of salaries. Even in these 2 schools that are camp-based, we have some nationals coming from the host community and they study along with refugee students in these camp-based schools. There's a gradual shift from a humanitarian approach to a developmental focus with more emphasis on sustainable livelihood and social cohesion. As of an example, there's been construction of more classrooms, as I mentioned earlier, to resolve that issue, not to have refugee students being the burden to the hosting schools. So far, more than 200 classrooms were built just to address that issue. Next slide, please. Yes, Rwanda is one of those governments that when it comes to policies, especially on refugees, they are among like the top governments supporting refugees. Refugees are included in national services such as education, health, and socio-economic and financial inclusion. When we try to compare 2013 and 2023, we can see a huge difference. Refugee inclusion in 2013 was 40%. And as of last year, 2023, now refugee inclusion is at 96%. This also includes not only refugees, but also asylum seekers in the country. Government made 9 pledges at the 2023 Global Refugee Forum in 5 thematic areas where we have education, livelihood, energy and environment, protection, and solution for health. Education has been always key, where it's amazing whenever you visit all those schools hosting refugees and you can see them sitting side by side, being recognized as other students when it comes to financing and so on. So this also is one of the pledges being fulfilled on a daily basis by Rwandan government and other key stakeholder partners. We have also UNHCR-led advocacy and coordination focus on ensuring that refugees have access to free education and household expenses are covered. Here we can give an example of scholastic materials. We can give an example of uniforms, and UNHCR coming to support us just for the parent contribution. This also goes for school feeding. For Rwanda, we have a school feeding policy where parents contribute. So because of the economic financial situation of refugee parents, UNHCR coming just to support when it comes to payment of school fees, feeding fees, and the fees are paid directly to the schools hosting our refugee students. Next slide, please. Well, the picture that you can see here on the slide, they are all classrooms. And you can see where Kiziba schools, they were in June 2019, and now where we are. This is like a journey. We can see the tremendous job of different development partners like World Bank and others supporting just to move from A to B. It's like vivid that with this improvement, we are going to support to have safe environment for the students, but also not being the burden for the hosting schools. These are the newly constructed classrooms in Kiziba. The classrooms were inaugurated in November 2022. This is an example of more schools being constructed across all the locations in the country, but it's still a journey. We are not yet like where we can say the classroom ratio, student classroom ratio is on the standard, but we are on good track. Thank you so much. I would like to welcome my colleague, Jahed. Yes, it's also about the WASH facilities. Just the infrastructure is like before and after. Now we are where I can say like that's WASH facility compared to where we were like 5 years ago. Thank you so much. You are most welcome, Jahed, for Bangladesh case study. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mediatrice, and good evening, everyone from Bangladesh. I'm going to talk about a unique case study from Bangladesh. Could you please, next slide. Yeah, UNHCR is very grateful to the government of Bangladesh for its generosity, as well as for hosting around 1 million refugees, 50% of whom are school children. But the government of Bangladesh has a strict policy for Rohingya responses, and the activities within the camps are strictly regulated. The Rohingyas can be divided into caseload, the new arrivals who came after 1992, who are not recognized as refugees. Instead, they are recognized as forcefully displaced Myanmar nationals. We call it FDMN. And the refugees who arrived before 1992, they are called old caseload, and they are recognized as refugees. Then NTF, National Task Force, headed by Minister of Foreign Affairs, is the decision-making authority from the government of Bangladesh, which is executed by the Refugee Relief and Repatriation Commissioner based in Cox's Bazar. According to the government policy, neither inclusion into the national education systems nor using Bangladeshi curriculums is allowed by the refugees. Despite there is a huge policy barriers exist in Bangladesh, but we can see some positive development in a couple of years. One of those is the authorization of the skill development framework that allows refugees to access to skills training in a limited skills. Additionally, one of the big achievements for education sector is the introduction of the Myanmar curriculum. Government authorized in 2020 allows refugees to access Myanmar curriculum in a non-formal settings. Next slide, please. Yeah. In relation to the access, when we are going to talk about FDMN, I would say introduction of the Myanmar curriculum has a significant impact. It increased enrollment as well as it's increased regular attendance. For an example, last 2 years, around 92,000 out of school children, they participated in placement test and they are enrolled in the education systems. But before having the introduction of the Myanmar curriculum, learning competency framework approach was developed by the education sectors. It was implemented between 2019 to 2021. But it was unable to fulfill the community expectations due to not being aligned with any formal curriculum. So at that time, the community continued asking for a formal curriculum, either from Bangladesh or Myanmar. As a result, UNHCR, along with UNICEF and other leading agencies, for an example, Save the Children, we did a joint advocacy effort to the government of Bangladesh to authorize the Myanmar curriculum. Finally, the Myanmar curriculum was authorized in 2020, but due to COVID-19, there was a delay to implement the piloting, which was started in December 2021. The full scale up to grade 10 has been completed in July 2023. In relation to the access, every year the education sectors facilitate and enrollment campaigns across the camps, as well as organize placement tests to make sure that students, out of school children, are enrolled in appropriate grades. In relation to the access to the old caseload refugees, they have access to the Bangladeshi curriculum until 2019. After the influx in 2017, the government of Bangladesh issued a directive about non-use of Bangla as a language of instructions, and also the use of Bangladeshi curriculum is prohibited. As a result, use of Bangladeshi curriculum was stopped in 2019. We see there is a learning disruption for 3 years, resulting high level of absenteeism and school refusals. Then we continue advocating to the government of Bangladesh, either to allow us to continue Bangladeshi curriculum or to allow us to implement any international curriculums. So finally, we got the authorization from the government of Bangladesh to introduce an international curriculum in 2024. Additionally, in Cox's Bazar, particularly when the girls are grown up, the parents, they deny to send their kids to the schools. But to ensure gender equality and increase girls' participations, all the education partners, we take some different initiatives. We establish separate classrooms and sessions for girls in upper primary, secondary, as well as adolescent programming. And another big challenge is for us space shortage to establish require additional classrooms. As a result, last couple of years, education partners are establishing more community-based learning facilities, particularly for early grade students, so that we can accommodate all those learners in the classrooms. Next slide, please. In relation to the quality, I think lack of qualified and trained teachers is one of the big challenges for us from the beginning. But last couple of years, I think there is a huge investment, not only by UNHCR, but also by other partners. UNHCR have taken to major initiatives. One of those is facilitate mentorship training for 250 master trainers from a range of education partners. The training focused on learner-centered pedagogy, as well as empowering technical personnels as an education leader so that they can contribute in ongoing teacher professional development activities. The training was facilitated jointly by Bard College USA as well as Brack University Bangladesh. Another intervention is actually a 2 months long certified teachers training on pedagogy, which is also facilitated by Brack University Bangladesh. Around 4,000 teachers that participated in this training. Around 50% of them are refugees. So this training has been proven to be one of the most effective initiatives to equip teachers with necessary pedagogical skills to deliver Myanmar curriculum. Apart from these particular two initiatives, I think all the education partners, including the educational sectors, we give more emphasis on ongoing teacher professional development activities through different arrangements, such as peer-to-peer support between host and refugee teachers in the learning center, which could be one of the unique examples for peaceful collaboration between refugees and host communities. And another initiative I'd like to indicate here, teacher-led weekly teacher learning circle, a group of teachers, they are meeting together for 2 hours weekly to discuss about their best practices, challenges. Along it, also there is a micro teachings, which is actually one of the initiatives for the self-development by the teachers. Apart from that, monthly refreshers training as well as cross-cutting training is ongoing. Another big challenges for education sectors in Cox's Bazar is language barriers, because most refugees speaks in Rohingyas, which has no written script, but the Myanmar language is the second language for them. Most of the subjects are written in Myanmar languages, and host teachers, they are unable to teach all the subjects, which increase the workload for the Rohingya teachers. Even the host community facilitators, supervisors, they are not in a position to contribute more on quality assurance aspects. So now from the educational sectors, supported by UNESCO, we are going to take initiative about the Myanmar language training, which is still in the planning stage, but we are going to implement very soon. I think which could be one of the solutions for this. And addition to that, in relation to the quality aspects, education sectors facilitate year-end assessment just to help teachers as well as learners to understand whether they are performing well or whether there is a gaps that can guide the education sectors to amend the strategies as appropriate. Additionally, a joint monitoring mechanism is established that include joint monitoring by the education sectors, half-yearly joint monitoring by the SEC members, and yearly joint monitoring by the SEC plus members. Additionally, one of the policy barriers is establishing permanent structure is not allowed in the camps, but the learning center, what right now we are building is temporary structures, but it's really a bit good ventilations as well as decorated with appropriate teaching learning materials. We believe this create a safe and child-friendly space for the students. Next slide, please. Considering a very complex situation as well as huge policy barriers, so in Cox's Bazar we have developed a robust coordination mechanism that include ISCG, which is led by UNHCR and serve as a central coordination body for 10 thematic sectors as well as subsectors, including the education sectors. Then followed by you have education sectors under ISCG, which is also co-led by UNICEF as well as Save the Children. Additionally, there is another strategic advisory groups for education sectors, which is led by UNHCR as well as one of the government high officials. We call it additional deputy commissioners. So this strategic advisory groups is guide the education sectors about their strategic decision-making process. Additionally, there is several technical working groups which also support the education sectors to develop educational guidelines and strategies. Thank you very much. I would like to invite again Ruth to continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Jahed and Mediatrice for illustrating what the situation is in Rwanda and Bangladesh and the breakthroughs that have been achieved there. Even when the situation isn't inclusive education, there is still progress we're seeing in Bangladesh, and it's really that coordinated action of the education sector that's helping drive that progress. So why does this matter? What does it tell us? I think a lot of the findings are in line with things we already know from education elsewhere. We already know the importance of good parental engagement, teaching at the right level, teacher professional development that integrates supervised practice and peer learning and not just sat in a short course. But what this shows is that for those working in education of refugees, the key area of expertise needed is around carefully managing transitions. Now, those transitions could be about the individual student, making sure that an individual refugee student enters the school at the right grade, with the right language support necessary, and whether that needs to go via an informal step or direct entry. Those transitions are important. But more complex and difficult are the transitions of schools and whole systems from an NGO or UN agency management into a national system. And transitions involve changes in language, curriculum, school ownership, teacher management, including payment, which can be a particularly thorny and difficult issue to manage. And it also involves transitions from humanitarian funding to national funding, but with development partner support. And that development partner support needs to go beyond just the bricks and mortar of providing the capacity to support for ongoing situations. And managing these it requires expertise of both education and refugee protection. And it's people like Jahed and Mediatrice and colleagues around the world from UNHCR who are able to work in terms of coordinating different actors, different levels of government in driving forward these transitions and making sure they happen effectively. And they really are one of the key enabling factors. So what does this tell us going forward? What do we need? We need investments in people like Jahed and Mediatrice. We need investments in technical expertise at the country level with a crossover between education and protection of refugees. We need to ensure that there is a good transition from from humanitarian to development funding, and that development funding covers the costs that national governments take on as a result of inclusion. And there needs to be ongoing work to support students and teachers and systems to cope with the transitions in language, in curriculum, in where they study, and importantly, social cohesion for better quality learning. So thank you very much. I'm going to open it now for questions and hand back to Nina.
Great. Thank you, Ruth. Thank you, Mediatrice, and thank you, Jahed. I'm going to just jump right into some of the questions that I'm seeing in the chat, and then I also see a few questions in the Q&A function as well. So we have from Anna Maria Tummy. This is a question on the Rwanda case. How are refugees included / classified in the EMIS so that you are able to have the data on enrollment? I recall that at one time, the education sector plan made no mention of refugees, and wondering also whether that has changed. Lastly, and there's a few questions on this, does Rwanda also employ refugees as teachers in national schools? And then Mediatrice, before you answer those two, there's one more question from Chris Berry. How is Rwanda measuring refugee access to education? And are there any political challenges to inclusion? So I think those are a little bit overlapping with Anna Maria's question.
Can I go directly?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Well, for the two questions, the first one, if refugee students are appearing into EMS, yes, they do, because like there's no distinction of refugees and nationals, only on their nationalities. And being a Congolese does not necessarily mean that you are a refugee. And like my colleagues here in the office of like the international staff, they are students when they are in different, they are children when they are in different schools, they are enrolled as according to their different nationalities. But for our students, our refugees into the EMS, they are not mentioned as refugees, but at school level with our implementing partner, which is World Vision, that's when we track refugee students. We were thinking of like including that rubric just into the EMS, but with the protection concerns still, we are hesitating to request to the government to do that. Yes, we do calculate the enrollment rate on a school basis, because we have implementing partner on those schools where we can track the refugees. We track them because we are paying for school feeding, we are paying for uniform and scholastic materials. So teachers are not, as of now, yet hired by the government of Rwanda, refugee teachers, and those in Kiziba schools, two schools that are not yet fully integrated, are not yet on the government payroll. There was also one question asking about the refugee teachers being on the payroll. So teachers, as of now, they are not recruited by into public schools, but they are recruited into private schools, because in the country you have several public schools and private schools, and on those public private schools, they are hired as other teachers. Negotiations are still ongoing because there's that pledge also on refugee inclusion even into socio-economic activities, and the conversation are still ongoing to have them fully like recruited as nationals are being recruited. The first step was already done. They are now able to register and apply into the system. Before, they couldn't even apply into the system. The system could like deny their refugee ID number, but as of now, the process is on the track. Thank you so much.
And Mediatrice, there's just the last part of that question was, are there any political challenges to inclusion? And let me include that with another question from Olad Farah, which is, are there any challenges in, well, is there anything specific around language barriers for integration and inclusion?
Okay. Language barrier, yeah, I saw the question. I thought it was for Bangladesh. In Rwanda, we have majority of refugees are from Congo and the eastern part of Congo, where they speak their own like mother tongue, but they speak also Kinyarwanda. That's why when we talked of their inclusion into public schools, it's like the process is smooth because the communication is easier. Others are from Burundi, and Kirundi and Kinyarwanda languages are like brothers and sisters. When I go to Burundi, I can communicate easily. When Burundian come to Rwanda, we can communicate easily. So, but there is that like small period where there is intensive, especially on English, because in their home countries, the language of instruction is the French, while in Rwanda, the language of instruction is English. So before they are integrated into public schools, there is this the bridge orientation program. And during the orientation program, we basically focus on English, but when it comes to normal language for communication outside of the classroom, the language they speak, the refugees from Congo and Burundi, it's much easier and close to Kinyarwanda, and they can communicate easily in even their host communities. Thank you. Did I respond to all?
Yeah, great job. I'm going to move over to a few questions on Bangladesh. I'm gonna put these together. So Jahed, this is a very interesting question. Is the case of Bangladesh on a continuum? They seem to be stuck in limbo. Any comments on that? And then let me just add another question on language differences. So how have language differences been addressed, particularly regarding literacy for Bangladesh? And then are textbooks being supplied to the Rohingya in their own language?
Thank you, Nina. So in responding the question about the language differences, how it being addressed, as I mentioned in my presentations, Rohingya is their mother languages, which there is no written script. Myanmar language is the own languages for the Myanmar nationals. So it's supposed to be their own languages, but in the Bangladesh case, for the Rohingyas, is the second languages. So in our teaching process, what we are doing, all the language of instructions is provided in Rohingya languages, while actual teachings is using the Myanmar languages. Additionally, teachers are being trained on using mother tongue-based multi-language teaching process, so that they can use the appropriate teaching process in the classroom, so that students are in a position to understand the contents. In relation to printing the textbooks in the Rohingya languages, I think, as I mentioned, Rohingya is their mother languages, but in a sense, Myanmar language also could be their own languages because as a national from the Myanmar. So all the textbooks are printed in Myanmar languages, excluding the English textbooks, which is really globally printed in English. Then what about the third question?
The other question is more around, if we're looking at the inclusion continuum, Bangladesh does seem to be a little bit stuck. What are your comments on that?
Yeah, I think even in relation to the inclusion to the national educational systems, I don't see even within recent future it could be feasible, because Bangladesh policy constraint is really very much difficult in relation to the providing any inclusion to the national education systems policy and procedures. Even in relation to the certifications, when you are talking about with the government of Bangladesh to facilitate formal assessment, Bangladesh government says no, you can implement Myanmar curriculum, but in the non-formal settings. That means you cannot facilitate any formal assessment to provide any kind of certificates. Over.
Thanks, Jad. It's definitely a challenging environment, which is why we wanted to make sure that we studied it for this piece of work. I'm going to go back to Rwanda. This is coming from Meredith Bouvier. Could you speak more to the two schools in the one camp where the teachers are not being paid by the government? What are the reasons behind this? And are there plans for getting them on the government payroll? And this is from Meredith Bouvier from GPE.
Thank you so much. The two schools, one is a primary school, another is a secondary school. They are both camp-based, and as I mentioned, 100% of teachers, they are refugees who are getting incentives, not salaries. We do recognize that the work they do and the incentives they get there is really much difference. And we do recognize also the step that we are moving towards with the Ministry of Emergency Management, which coordinates the camp and refugee operations in the country. Also with the Ministry of Education, because by the time these two schools were established in 1998, like during the emergence, the hurry was just to build schools and having kids starting to learn. Then we found ourselves where the two schools were registered as private schools. That's why the government is not contributing to the payment of teachers. So as of now, we are pushing towards to have the schools integrated and the teachers now go on the government payroll where they are getting salaries instead of incentives. But also those same teachers, they are in the camp and getting some humanitarian assistance when it comes to shelter, when it comes to water, when it comes to other NFIs, when it comes to other humanitarian assistance that UNHCR and UN agencies at the camp level and different partners are providing to all refugees that are camp-based. Even the teachers are getting the assistance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mediatrice. And I think we have time for just a couple more questions. So I'm going to combine, we're getting some questions around interventions and particularly around classroom improvements and infrastructure improvements. And the claim that this is having an impact on quality, is it impacting only access, or how do we know that it's impacting quality?
Yes. Thank you, Nina. Yes, it's contributing to both. There is access first because students across all those refugee camps, they are accessing to school. They have where to go to. They are not having classrooms under trees or in a temporary shelter. They are classrooms on like government standard, and it's improving equality when we have them not yet on the standardized ratio, but when because in Rwanda the government committed to recruit teachers whenever UNHCR or any other development partner build classrooms. So whenever there are classrooms that are built, teachers are hired as well and paid by the government. And when we have the teachers, when like teaching in a conducive environment, we have also the access and contributing to the quality. And we can see that during some different national examinations that are taking place every year here in Rwanda, that refugee hosting schools and refugees are performing best. So we see the access, and when there is that safe space and teachers are hired, this contributes to quality as well. Thank you.
Okay, now we've got a lot of really good questions here. I think I want to just recognize the question from Steve Poole. The report references improvements in literacy in 2 camp schools, and there are several verbatims with regards to improvements in both literacy and numeracy. Is there any region/country level data available on improvements in literacy and numeracy in these refugee populations in response to the investments and interventions that are being discussed in the case studies? And Ruth, I'll hand that over to you.
A good question. Data around refugee education has improved dramatically, and you'll see there is data on exam results coming out in UNHCR annual reports now, but it's still not very strong, I'd say, in that we can't track changes over time in many cases. So a lot of the data we found for this report was quite anecdotal. There's a lot of data being collected, but still not a lot of data being shared. So there's still barriers. I mean, there's this huge learning assessment going on that takes place annually in Cox's Bazar, but we're still not really seeing the data from that in terms of concrete evidence of what is the state of learning and what are the improvements to learning. So I can't say that we have strong concrete evidence of improvements in learning. Data on learning is improving, but it was a very low baseline to start with, and more data sharing is really important. More data are being collected, but they need to be shared and analyzed now.
Thank you, Ruth. And I want to just, we've got some really good questions that have not been answered. So we're going to collect those, and we're going to see if we can respond to them in a feedback note. In closing, I'd like to thank INEE for providing this really important space for learning and exchange. And as we navigate through the complexities of refugee education, let us remain hopeful and committed to transforming barriers into breakthroughs. Our discussions today are not just about identifying problems, but also about celebrating the progress and envisioning a future where every refugee child can thrive through education. And we encourage you to please read the study. Thank you so much.
Thank you.